Welcome to WiseTake.com. This is CK013. You can find me on Twitter at CK_013. And yes, we are bringing you another NBA DFS podcast. It is Wednesday, March 8th, 2017. We've got a lot of games tonight. I haven't even counted them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 games on tonight's slate. We know Wednesday nights are typically a good night for GPPs, as there are usually a ton of slates. I will say, we always say if you prefer these smaller ones, for some people these larger ones are overwhelming, and for myself at times, if I don't see a lot of plays I like, and so far in this slate, to be honest, there's not too much I like. It is a little tough. It's tough for cash games. It's tough for GPPs just because there's almost too many options. And there's usually only one or two guys that really just go nuts and that you have to have. For instance, on Monday, that was a large slate, and we saw that went with Jokic out. I think Chandler was kind of one of those guys, Wilson Chandler. He was one of those guys you kind of had to have if you wanted to make significant money. And that was a day where we had a free play. We had Biombo. That's not the case anymore. His price is up. I can promise you that. So it should be a lot of fun. Last night's slate was 3 games. I personally didn't do all that well. And, unlike our guy, Fuego Steve, I'm not a short slate guy. I prefer larger slates. I like to have options. I'm very indecisive, and I love options. And I like to do multiple lineups. I like to hedge myself. Those are some of the things that I like to do. So on a larger slate, I do typically like larger slates. But I like, 5, 6, 7, even 8 games. 10, 11, 12 games, that's a little much. And so if it's a little too much for you, if you're uncomfortable playing these larger slates, break it down. Join the turbo slates at 8 o'clock or the late night slates at the 9, the 9:30, the 10. Do those if that's your thing. So don't try to force it. Don't look at it like, okay, well, the bigger prizes are all at the main slate, so that's what I'm going to do. No. If you're better at shorter slates, shorten the slate up to a point where you're better, where it fits your, what are they going to say? It fits your skill set, right? That's pretty much what we're looking for. Anyway, we got a lot to get through today, so I'm going to get started. Real quick, before we actually start, Wise Take Live will happen today, but it will be a little early. My nephew's got he's in the Final Four of his basketball league, so we got to watch that game. That game's going to be at 6 p.m. Eastern, so instead of 5:30 to 6 like we normally do, it's going to be from 5 to 5:30. So please, if you're going to be attending that show at 5 o'clock on YouTube, please just tell whoever you can about it. We want to get as many people in that chat as we possibly can. Just really livens up the show, gives us more to talk about. And just some of the things, if you haven't seen a Wise Take Live episode, you can watch some of the older ones. But I typically just go over the recent news and I talk about, what I'm thinking. And I try to get a feel for what you guys are thinking and kind of relay with the general consensus of the slate. So definitely tune in for that. We also, for Thursday's podcast, so Wednesday night, we will be recording with Fuego Steve again. We're going to bring him on. I think it's like a 5-game slate, so I think this is right up his alley, and definitely get some fun insight. We had a good time with him on last time. We're going to bring him on and see how that goes. So I know we're excited for it. Hopefully Steve is too, and hopefully all you listeners can appreciate when a guy like him is on, and we kind of talk about DFS. If you like talking about DFS in general, then I don't see why you wouldn't like the pod. But anyway, so let's get started with some injuries. We have a pretty big list here, and there's still a lot of stuff that we're waiting to hear about. So it's another slate, just like always. You're going to have to be there by lock. You're going to have to be paying attention. If you're going to do multiple lineups and you have plans to go out before lock, I would either change your plans or I would change my mind about the lineups because, when there's so many moving parts like there is on an 11-game slate, there's more of a chance that things are going to happen, like injury news, rest news, than there is that there's not. So even on a slate like today, for instance, Monday, the injury list was not that big for a massive slate like it was. And then what happened right before lock, we got some crucial news that really, really kind of changed up the slate and changed up the way things were going. Anyway, so let's start off with some injuries. Rajon Rondo is questionable with an ankle at Orlando. Dwayne Wade is also questionable with a thigh at Orlando. Vooch is questionable with an Achilles versus Chicago. Joe Harris is out with a concussion at Atlanta. Mike Dunleavy is out with his ankle against Brooklyn. Frank Kaminsky is out with a shoulder at Miami. Miles Plumlee is out. with a calf at Miami. Luke Babbitt is questionable with a back. James Johnson is questionable with an elbow. Tyler Johnson is questionable with a shoulder. Carl White is questionable with an ankle. That's all for Miami. Those are all Miami players. They're all questionable going into their game with Charlotte. And, of course, Josh McRoberts is out with a foot. DeMarre Carroll is questionable with an ankle at New Orleans. Kyle Lowry, we obviously know, is still out with a wrist. Omar Asik is out due to illness. Derek Favors is questionable with a knee. Shelvin Mack is out with an ankle. George Hill is questionable with a toe. Joe Johnson is questionable with a groin. Ryan Anderson is questionable with a back. Lavoy Allen questionable with a knee. Michael Beasley is expected to be out for, I think, 2 weeks. Milwaukee has a matchup with New York. Lance Stevenson is out with an ankle, although he did just sign a second 10-day contract. Kenneth Faried is out with his back against Washington. Nikola Jokic is questionable with that illness. We got to pay attention there. Al Horford is questionable with an elbow. Jerebko is questionable with illness. And Kevin Durant, obviously, we know is out. So there you have it. That's just the injuries that we know about. And obviously there's a lot of question marks in there. It's mostly just a matter of what we're looking for, the information that we're looking to hear before tomorrow's 7 p.m. lock. You gotta be ready for the late night adjustments. So that's all the stuff that we know. You still have to be prepared for those late night adjustments because the late night news is the one that the least amount of people have time to react to. Therefore, that's the one that you're going to make your bread and butter on. That's the one that you're going to differentiate yourself on. For instance, for me on Monday, I mentioned on yesterday's pod that when I heard the news about Jokic, I started thinking, what did Denver do? Who was running the Denver team before Jokic was really getting his run? Because even when Jokic was playing early on, he wasn't seeing a lot of minutes. And so they were being carried on the back of other players. One of those players was obviously Wilson Chandler, and he was the one I ultimately ended up putting in just because his price point fit. Another guy another guy you could have your eye on. We'll talk about him a little bit later. But again, it's how you react. That's one of the ways that will really differentiate you, especially on such a large slate like this. One of the best ways to differentiate your lineups is just to react to the late news. Everybody hears the same late news, but not everybody reacts the same way to that news. So, little words of wisdom. Anyway, we're going to start off with point guard here. James Harden at 10-9, super cheap price. He's obviously getting the Utah discount. He had a discount against San Antonio, put up 61.75 DraftKings points and an 11.5 salary. So that's 2 games in a row where he played 2 of the slowest paced teams and best defensive teams in the league and still broke 60 DraftKings points. His price is now under $11,000. James Harden is under $11,000. And to be honest, I still don't feel comfortable playing him. Look, his 3 matchups in a row, he's played 3 of some of the slowest teams in the league in a row. He played the Clippers, the Grizzlies, and San Antonio. And now he's got a matchup with the slowest team, the best defense. And even though the total is high for a Utah game, it is certainly low for a Rockets game. So play Harden at your own risk. I would put him in GPPs only, even though his price is super attractive in cash games. But we've seen him play Utah. I'm pretty sure we've seen him play Utah earlier, and he did struggle a little bit. So, obviously, you're going to have to pay attention to some of the news. If we find out some of the Rockets are out, like, for instance, Ryan Anderson being out, it's going to have some kind of effect. What effect exactly, I'm not quite sure. Maybe a guy like Trevor Ariza might be more relied upon, at least for rebounds and things like that. Or maybe a guy like Montrezl Harrell will get more run at the power forward position. So, there's different things you got to pay attention to with the injuries. But as far as Harden goes, I don't know for sure if I'll be playing him. At 10-9, it's very tempting not to. But he is playing Utah, and I really don't like targeting people against Utah. John Wall is 10-7. He's on the back end of a back-to-back. However, he has a dream matchup against Denver. This game, obviously, I think it's got the highest total of the night. I'm going to double-check that real quick. I'm pretty sure by far, 227. Even a higher total than the Golden State-Boston game. And the spread is only 1. Denver is favored by 1, so they're expecting a close game. I don't play John Wall a lot because I think his price is significantly it's super heavy. And at 10-7, I'm still kind of there. But in tournaments, I think I will have to play Wall just because the matchup is just too good. I haven't really checked how Wall does on back-to-backs. That's something I'm going to look into as we get closer to lock. So maybe that's something you could look into on your own. Steph Curry is 10-1. I really like Steph against Boston. Now, he's returning home. On Monday, I mentioned that I was going to fade Kemba. I did fade Kemba, and it didn't hurt me at all. My lineups are completely fine. I was happy with my results that day. I only played GPPs, and I placed in most of them, so I was happy with that. But I will admit I was wrong on the Kemba fade. I think he put up just under 50 DraftKings points, so my bad on that one. Anyway, my point is that the reason that I wanted to fade Kemba was because his team was on a long west, they were across the country in a long road trip. It was the first game back home, and hey, they got the job done. Now, Golden State finds themselves in the exact same position. They were on the East Coast, or at least the east side of the country, battling out on a road trip, and now they have their first game back home without Kevin Durant. And Steph Curry and Klay Thompson are the two guys that gets the massive usage bump without Durant. And Steph Curry's price is now down to 10-1. And I think that's reasonable. We've seen him go from 10-4. He was 10K against Chicago. So at 10K, 5x off of 10K is basically 50 DraftKings points, right? So if he gets 50, you're looking okay. So far with Durant out, Durant got hurt against Washington on the 28th, I believe. So against Chicago, 47 DraftKings points. Against New York, 55.5 DraftKings points. Against Atlanta, 44.5 DraftKings points. I think the chances of him coming close to that salary is pretty high. And to be honest, in this matchup against Isaiah Thomas at home, I think the chances of him surpassing 50 DraftKings points is very, very likely. I wouldn't be surprised to see Steph put up 55 to 60 here. I'm not in love with the play, but I certainly see the merit in playing a guy like Steph Curry. I definitely think he's in play. I think Giannis is way too cheap at 9.8. I'd probably prefer to play him at small forward just because small forward is typically a tougher position to field. Forwards in general, opposed to point guards. You want to play as many point guards as possible. Obviously, they're the guys with the monster usage. They're the guys who get a lot of peripherals. So I love Giannis's price at 9.8. His matchup is fantastic against the Knicks. The Knicks are a horrible defensive team, and they really don't have any solid rim protectors. Even Porzingis. Okay, yeah, Porzingis gets a block here or there, but he gets beat all the time. And I really like Giannis at 9.8 against the New York Knicks. But like I said, I prefer to play him at small forward. IT2 is only 8.8. His price came down. I think that's because we've seen Bradley. Bradley's healthy now. He's playing, and they're not all so reliant on IT2. But he's still IT2, and he's still soaking up monster usage. Even against the Clippers, he got 48.5 DraftKings points, and that was a situation where he was pretty low owned. A lot of people were afraid to go there. They didn't want to play him against Chris Paul, including myself. I didn't play Isaiah Thomas. I think I had him in one lineup, and that lineup didn't do much. But at 8.8, his price is nice. It's nice to see him under 9K again, and we know what he's capable of. So if you think that – now the line is 8 here. It's not that bad. If you think the Celtics are going to keep this close, they're keeping it close on the back of IT2. So keep that in mind when you're setting your lineups. I think Chris Paul is extremely cheap. He's 8.5 on DraftKings. Now, listen, Minnesota is also another defensive-minded team. Not that everybody's good at defense, but they do have some decent defenders in Andrew Wiggins, for instance. I think Levine was one of their better defenders. They're missing him, obviously. However, they do still have Wiggins, and they're a slower-paced team than I think people realize because we've seen them in high-scoring games against some of these faster-paced teams. They are actually a slower-paced team, so this is a pace-down spot. And I think you can kind of get the idea with the total. The total is the total is 211. I thought it was shorter than that. 211 is a pretty attractive total in my opinion in this kind of game. And to get a guy like Chris Paul at 8.5, I think it's a phenomenal discount. I know recently he hasn't really been living up to his numbers. But remember at one point, seeing Chris Paul put up 50 burgers was a regular thing. So we know what kind of upside he's capable of. And I think that a lot of people were kind of hoping for more against Boston. He was 9K against Boston, and he got just under 40 DraftKings points, so that was kind of a disappointing, I think, effort for people who played him in GPPs. And I think this is a situation where they might back off a little bit because IT2 is within reach. Steph Curry and John Wall are in elite spots. So I think that this is a situation where we could get some low ownership on Chris Paul possibly just because I think that there's other options. But I love Chris Paul. I mean, I could be wrong. He could be mega chalky because of his price. But I love Chris Paul at 8.5. It's just way too cheap, in my opinion, for a guy his caliber, especially in a matchup against a Ricky Rubio. Nothing against Rubio, but he's got nothing on John Wall. Kemba Walker is 8K. His price fell once again, and I think the reason his price fell this time is just because of the matchup. He's got a tougher matchup with Goran Dragić. I do think Kemba will be fairly low owned, even though he's been crushing lately. He's back on the road. People don't like to play him on the road. And he's got a matchup with Miami, and people are going to go on DraftKings. They're going to see that red 5th under opponent rank, and I think they might stay away from Kemba. At 8K, I think he's cheap enough to where he can make something happen. I think he's very interesting. He's not one of my favorite plays by any means. I'd much rather pay the extra 500 and play Chris Paul. But if that's the direction you think everybody's going to go and you think maybe you could pivot to Kemba as a cheaper way to go, then be my guest by all means. I'm not against it. Goran Dragić at 7'2", certainly in play. Jrue Holiday at 6'8" is okay, but Boogie and Davis are back, so we've seen his usage kind of take a back seat a little bit. Dennis Schroeder is 6'7" on DraftKings. I like the price. I like the matchup. I'm just a little concerned with that last game. I think he got into an argument with Howard, and then he ended up getting benched for most of the second half. So that's a little worrisome. Supposedly, it's water under the bridge at this point, but you never really know. Jeff Teague is extremely cheap at 6'7" at home against Detroit. Of course, Detroit is a slower-paced team, so I'm not positive that I'll be going there a lot. I might throw him in one or two, but I don't think my exposure to him is going to be too high, although we do know what kind of upside he's capable of. I'm not going to be on Rubio at 6'5" against the Clippers. Derrick Rose against Milwaukee. Rose really burned me. Him and Covington really messed up my lineups on Monday. I cashed in them, and I probably would have taken down a couple of GPPs had I not had Rose and Covington in there. They really kind of jammed me up. And at 6'4", I still think Rose is a decent cash game play just because they don't have a lot of backups. But we did see Chase and Randall come in and play 20-plus minutes, so they could be looking to give these kids a little bit of a run. I'm not positive. So he might not be as safe as he has been recently. Granted, he was on the back end of a back-to-back, and Melo wasn't playing. So that was a situation where I felt like they kind of had to. But you know what? The second unit did really well. So maybe the Knicks would be quicker to go to that second unit this time around. Elf on the Shelf was a monster play. If you had Elf, you probably won some money. If you had Elf and Chandler together on Monday, you probably won some money. He's 6'1" against Chicago. It's a pace-down spot. I think people might be chasing with Elf. He's one thing he's not is consistent. So after he just put up a 50-burger, I don't think I'm rushing to play him at this price increase, especially not in a pace-down spot against Chicago. Even though they don't really have a good point guard, I still don't know if that's where I want to go. But if that's where you want to go, I completely understand the merit in it. I'm just somebody who doesn't like to play guys after they're coming off of monster games. The only other guy I'm going to mention, that there's obviously a lot of plays. Reggie Jackson's only 5'1". He's interesting. Pat Beverly is only 5K. Collison at 5K. Jameer Nelson is only 4'9". So there's a lot of interesting plays out there. Even Lou Williams at 4'6" is interesting. Jeremy Lin is 4,500. This is obviously a tournament-only play. In his last game against Memphis, he played 24 minutes. So they're starting to slowly increase his minutes. And there's 2 games in a row. We've seen him with 30.25 DraftKings points against Portland, and that was only in 22 minutes. And then 25 DraftKings points against Memphis, a tough Memphis team, in 24 minutes. So I think Lin is starting to turn the corner. I love targeting point guards against Atlanta, and Lin is super cheap at 4,500. If they're going to give him another 24 minutes, I think he could definitely pay off his cheap salary of only 4,500 for sure. Let me see. Moving on to shooting guard. We're going to make it a little bit quicker from here. Obviously, I like to spend a lot of time on point guards because point guard, in my opinion, it's just a crucial position. You really can't get that wrong. Anyway, we got obviously we talked about James Harden. If I was going to play Harden, it'll probably be at the shooting guard position just because shooting guard is typically so much uglier. Jimmy Butler is 9.2. His price went up. Everybody was on him last time with Wade out. If Wade is out, he still remains an elite play against Orlando. However, his price is no longer a gimme. The other day, he was super cheap. That's why he was a gimme. His price is 9.2. Not exactly a gimme. He was 9.2 and he got 46.25. He pretty much just hit value. At 8,600 like he was on Monday, 46.25 was lovely. At 9.2, you might not be so happy if he gives you that kind of production. Well, who I do like DeMar DeRozan at 8,700. I think that's way too cheap. On FanDuel, he's a lot more expensive. So on DraftKings, you're getting a significant discount there. And it's a close spread. I think New Orleans is favored by about 2.5. It's a very low total. And I think people might have been surprised by that total. And at first I was too, and then I thought about it. The Pelicans were, in the beginning of the season, they were one of the fastest-paced teams in the league. But I think you can expect by the time the season ends, I think you can expect their pace to really drop now that they have Boogie and AD on the court together. The Kings were one of the slower-paced teams in the league this season, and I think Boogie was a big part of that. Even though the year before, even with Boogie, they were a fast-paced team. I think that people have figured out Boogie is better at a slower pace and to let him work. And Toronto, believe it or not, is a slower-paced team. They're not one of the faster-paced teams in the league. And I think a lot of people kind of get that mixed up because they know about Lowry and DeRozan. They're explosive players. But they're really not. It's not that type. DeMarre Carroll may miss. If DeMarre Carroll misses, I think even more usage goes to DeRozan because even DeMarre Carroll is a guy that does chuck up some threes. So I think that DeRozan would kind of take some of his shots. Of course, you could look at a guy like PJ Tucker, but we'll talk about him. But DeMar DeRozan at 8-7, people are going to see that red 4 under opponent rank on DraftKings, and they're going to stay away. But 8-7 for DeRozan is way too cheap for a guy with his amount of usage. Serge Ibaka is going to have his hands full down low with AD and Boogie. So I think it's going to be all up to DeRozan to keep Toronto in this game. I really like DeRozan at 8,700. Bradley Beal at 78, certainly in play against Denver. It's the back end of a back-to-back. He's coming off a pretty big game. So he's certainly a great play, phenomenal play. He's not somebody I'm dying to play just because I feel like he may be a little chalky, but he's certainly a solid play. Nick Batum against Miami, I think it's a fine play at 7-1. His price is still significantly low, and I think that he could do something decent with that. Klay Thompson at 7K, I love the price for Klay. I think it's okay. I don't know if I would play Klay and Curry together on such a large slate. Maybe on a smaller slate I would. On this slate, I don't know if I would. But you certainly can. Klay is a guy that gets a lot of his baskets on assists. Obviously, Curry is an assist guy. There's one warrior we'll get to later that I like probably the most out of all three of these guys, but I think Klay at 7K is certainly in play. Listen, he's not going to continue this horrible shooting. Eventually, he's going to pick this shooting up and he's going to start mashing. Dwayne Wade is questionable. We talked about that. I don't really like him too much against Orlando anyway at 6-7. Dion Waiters is coming off a monster game. He was another guy I pivoted to when I found out that I really liked Wiggins on Monday. That game was obviously canceled, so Waiters was a guy I pivoted to strong, him and Chandler, and Waiters did phenomenal. We found out Tyler Johnson was out, so it's a situation with injuries. The matchup isn't the best because he should see some Batum defense, but if we find out that Tyler Johnson is out and some of the other guys on Miami, James Johnson, some of these guys that they rely on for scoring as well, I think that means Waiters is going to keep chucking. So I think if those people are out, then I think you can certainly go back to Waiters at 6,300, even though the matchup might not be the best. Tim Hardaway has been playing phenomenally for the most part. His price has skyrocketed back up. For a while, he was super cheap. We saw him in the 4s, and he was mashing in the 4s, but his minutes have gone back up, and he's been crushing again. So against Brooklyn, I don't see why you wouldn't play him. He's 5,700. There is a little bit of concern with the blowout factor with Brooklyn, but Brooklyn has not been getting blown out as badly as I think a lot of us have been expecting in them. So there's a lot of interesting plays. Gary Harris at 53 is always interesting because he gets minutes. KCP is the epitome of a tournament play. Evan Fournier, all solid tournament options. Andre Iguodala even is coming off a monster game. I think he had 40 DraftKings points in it, 46 DraftKings points in his last game. I wouldn't count on that coming on a consistent basis, but at 5,400, you can give it a shot in a tournament. It's not going to kill you. I do think Avery Bradley is interesting at 5-1. Now, his minutes have been a little restricted, but I think against Golden State they might let him play a little bit, and we know what his upside is. Now, yeah, he's been playing a little weird. It's taken a little while to get going, but we know what kind of upside he actually has. The other guy that I think is interesting today from the Denver side, if Jokic is out. If Jokic is playing, he's the only Denver guy I'm going to want. If Jokic is out, we're going to have to look at some of these other guys like a Wilson Chandler, or better yet, the person I like more, a Will Barton. Now, Will Barton gets a big usage bump in addition to Chandler with Jokic out. When Jokic is out, they kind of go back to that ISO game, and Will Barton and Chandler are their ISO guys. So I know that if you look at the game logs, they've been ugly, but that's why his price is down so low. We know what kind of upside he has. Against Sacramento, without Jokic, he did play 27 minutes. Even against Charlotte with Jokic, he still played 31 minutes. His shooting has been a little off, but that's going to correct itself at some point. Against Chicago on the 28th of February, in 29 minutes, he put up 33.5 DraftKings points. His price was 5.8. He's $1,000 cheaper at home. So if Jokic is out, I think Barton becomes a monster play for GPPs. Now, I'm not telling you to play him 100%. I'm not telling you to play him in cash. But at that price, if Jokic is out, just know Barton does get a significant usage bump. Rodney Hood is interesting against Houston. He's only 4,700. His minutes haven't quite been up there all the time, but we do know he has that upside. Now, against Sacramento, he played 33 minutes, got 38.5 DraftKings points. Against New Orleans, he only played 20 minutes. That's because it was in the back end of a back-to-back. Keep that in mind. So against Houston, he's a little rested. He might get more run, and at 4,700, he's certainly interesting. Bazemore is interesting as well against Brooklyn. I do think Bazemore's in play. Kilpatrick is in play for Brooklyn against Atlanta. Atlanta struggles against wings. Kilpatrick, 2 straight games now above 27 minutes or higher. 2 straight games above 33 DraftKings points. So I think Kilpatrick is certainly a GPP flyer. Lou Williams against Utah, he's only 4,600, so he's not a guy that I would rush to play. His minutes have been down. But again, in GPPs, if you're looking for guys with low ownership, I don't think anybody's going to be on Lou, and he's only 4,600 today. Eric Gordon, I feel the same way about. JJ Redick is interesting at 4K. So there's some options. They're not the most attractive. Even Austin Rivers is only 3.8K. I think that's a little off there. I think he's a guy that I have some interest in. His minutes have been wishy-washy, but he still has the upside. So anytime you get a player at 3,800, that cheap, and they have that upside available to them, I think you have to consider them. So at 3,800, that's super, super cheap. It's only $800 away from the minimum on DraftKings. He's somebody that I'm going to have exposure to in GPPs just because he's so cheap. Now, obviously, if other value opens up, I may not have to use him. But based off the value that I see open now, he's certainly a guy that's in my mind. Moving on to small forward here. Kawhi Leonard's 10K against Sacramento. That's too much for me, but he's Kawhi Leonard. He's very good at what he does. He's very good at basketball. Giannis, I love Giannis at 9.8. If I'm going to play him, it's going to be a small forward, and I think I'm going to play him a good amount. We talked about Butler. Paul George is 8-1 against Detroit. That's a little too high for me. I'm not crazy about that. I do think Gordon Hayward is very interesting at 7.9, although we do know some of these guys are healthy. If George Hill is out again, then I like Hayward a lot more because that's a guy that's going to pick up some of those shots. But if Hill plays, 79 is a little expensive. You're paying up because of the fact that he's got a matchup with Houston. Carmelo Anthony he's supposed to be playing against Milwaukee. He's 7-6 on DraftKings. Interesting price. I don't really foresee that, unless they put Giannis on him. I don't see them having a defender that can really contain him. And typically when Melo has a day off, he usually comes back chucking, so I think he's in play. But obviously Rose and Porzingis are both healthy, so it's not necessarily a must play. Andrew Wiggins is only 7.5, but he is going to have, one, he's in a pace down spot. Two, he's going to have some Mamute defense on him. Mamute is one of the Clippers' better defenders. He's pretty good, and he plays a small forward. So he's going to be on Wiggins. I still think Wiggins is going to chuck up a bunch of shots, so I still love Wiggins at 7,500, and I'm hoping that people kind of get afraid to play him. I don't know if that's going to be the case, but I'm hoping people get a little worried and don't want to play him. But at 7,500, I think it's a great price for a guy that has the amount of usage that he has, and I really loved him on Monday, too. It's a shame that game got canceled. We talked about Batum. Wilson Chandler, 6,800. If Jokic plays, I'm not touching Chandler. If Jokic is out, I think it's okay to go back to him. He's coming off a game where he was only 6K, and he put up 64.5 DraftKings points, so I think people took note of that. So if Jokic is out, I expect him to be super popular once again. If Jokic is in, I'm going to avoid him just because Jokic is the only guy I'm going to want to play at that point. Chris Middleton is 6'6". He's certainly in play against New York. He should draw. I think he's going to draw some Carmelo Anthony defense, which is not very intimidating. Then again, Melo may have to guard Giannis. I'm not exactly sure, but that just shows you they have a matchup answer for Middleton. They really don't have one for Giannis, and that's why I really like Giannis, especially under 10K. So just throwing that out there. Otto Porter 64 is definitely in play. He's coming off a rough game, I think, but he's certainly in play against Denver. Let me see if there's anybody else worth mentioning. We talked about pretty much everybody else. I mentioned Ariza's interesting. If Ryan Anderson doesn't play, they may have to rely more on Ariza. They play him at the 3 sometimes. But the guy that I think, you can also look down the power forward position. You could, look at some other options. PJ Tucker's only 4K. If Carroll is out, then I think Tucker gets a lot more run here. He still played against Milwaukee. He played 29 minutes. And he got 18.5 DraftKings points. He's not exactly a high-usage guy, but in those 29 minutes against Milwaukee, he did take 10 shots. He only made 3 of them, but he did take 10 of them. So I think the upside can be there for a guy like him at 4K. So if you're looking for a punt option, he's definitely somebody you may want to consider, only if DeMarre Carroll is out. So there's some other guys probably cheaper that we can go through, but we're not. We're going to skip over to power forward because we got to get through this podcast. Let's start at the top. So Karl-Anthony Towns at 10.6. You might think it's a tough matchup, but it's still Karl-Anthony Towns, a very high-usage player, a very good player, certainly in play in tournaments. Anthony Davis is certainly in play in tournaments. I like Boogie better. I think most people will because he's cheaper. He's 9.9. Anytime you get Boogie under 10K against a team, even in a low total like 203, I still love Boogie at 99. I think he's very much in play. Blake Griffin is 8.6. His price continues to drop, and I don't know why he's still. I guess I get it. His performances haven't been Blake-esque, but I think this is a pretty good matchup, and I still like Blake. I like Chris Paul, and I like Blake, and you know what? That could be the chalky way to go. But I like them. I like them both. I think they're both way underpriced. And on FanDuel, you're not going to see that. On FanDuel, they're both in the 9s. I think they're both priced accurately. But on DraftKings, they seem way underpriced. Draymond Green is the Golden State guy I like the most. He's 8,200, so he's priced in between Curry and Thompson. But this is a matchup. Boston is one of the worst rebounding teams in the league, and Al Horford might not even play. That's going to create more issues for rebounding, and I think Draymond Green is in a situation where he could potentially rack up another one of those triple doubles without the points. Draymond's a guy that he may not score all the time, but you don't need him to necessarily score. He does get a lot of assists. He gets a decent amount of steals. He gets a lot of rebounds. So I really like Draymond at 8.2. Millsap at 7.7 is okay. I'm just, again, you're just concerned about the blowout factor there. Kristaps Porzingis is 7.1. I think he's interesting against Milwaukee. Milwaukee doesn't really have any good rim protectors. Yeah, you got Giannis, but I think Giannis might be preoccupied with Melo. So that might open things up for Porzingis at the 4 and 5. There's really no answer for him on Milwaukee, especially without Jabari, even though Jabari was not a very good defender. I don't think Monroe can really keep up with a guy like KP. He certainly ain't defending him from the perimeter, and I really don't see an answer for him. So I guess maybe you put Giannis on Porzingis and put like a Tony Snell maybe on Melo. I'm not sure. But either way, I think Porzingis, he's been playing better, and I think he's in a pretty good spot. His price is starting to come up, but it's not high enough to where it would scare me off. This is a guy against Golden State just the other day. He put up a 50-burger. Granted, it was in 40 minutes. It was still a 50-burger. So we know what kind of upside Porzingis brings, and at 7-1, I think he's certainly in play. Serge Ibaka at 6'6", I mentioned. I'm a little concerned he's going to have his hands full down low. Markieff Morris at 6'5", definitely in play against Denver. LMA certainly in play at 6'5". Aaron Gordon, if Vooch is out, you can continue to play Aaron Gordon just because his usage is going to continue to get that bump. Marvin Williams kind of crapped the bed against everybody. Miami's one of the best teams in the league against power forwards this season, and Marvin Williams just crapped the bed. A lot of people went to play him, including myself, because Kaminsky is out, and he's going to be forced to play these monster minutes. And he played 40 minutes against Indiana, only got 16.25 DraftKings points. His price did drop back down to 54, and the matchup on paper is horrible. However, in tournaments, I think he's a great contrarian play. I think he burned enough people on Monday that people are going to stay away. They're going to see that Miami is the first. They're going to see that a red 1 next to opponent ranking. So I think he's an interesting tournament play for a guy that probably will, once again, see another 40 minutes, especially when they're playing against the likes of Hassan Whiteside. Again, Nemanja Bjelica, I didn't look up his name. Bjelica? I'm not sure. But anyway, he's Nemanjabjelica. He's 4K. His price went up even though he didn't get a chance to play. He's the sneaky guy I like. Minnesota's not exactly one of those popular big market teams, so people typically don't know too much about him. At 4K, if you look at his game logs, I don't really need to explain. He's been getting some run. He only got 21 minutes against San Antonio, but he still got 22.25 DraftKings points. He got 32 minutes against Utah, got 42.25 DraftKings points. He got 35 minutes against Sacramento, got 34.5 DraftKings points. So he's a guy that I definitely have my eye on, and I will be getting some exposure to in GPPs. Moving on to the center. There's obviously more plays. I'm just talking about the guys that stand out to me. Moving on to center, we talked about Towns. I love the Joker. If Joker plays, even if he's sick at 10-3, I still want to take him. As long as this guy's under 11, I'm going to try to play him whenever I can. I just like what he does, and I like his upside. We talked about Davis, Cousins, and Green, and Millsap. Hassan Whiteside's only 7.7. Cody Zeller's a decent rim protector, believe it or not, but 7.7 is a very cheap price for a guy like Whiteside. I think he's certainly in play. Rudy Gobert's in a pace-up spot. My only concern is they may try to go small. It's something I like to do. But Gobert is in a pace-up spot, like I said. He has a massive upside. His price went up $600. So they're expecting, I think, they priced him appropriately for this matchup. So he could be a little chalky, but if he's chalky, there's a reason. I'm not saying that I'm in love with the play, but I certainly see merit at a pace-up spot. But like I said, there is concern they may go small. Andre Drummond against Indiana, only $7,500 for a guy like Drummond. A big usage guy. Gets a lot of boards for his team. Typically plays a good amount of minutes. And another guy with 50-point upside. I love Drummond today. Howard at 74. Obviously, he's a monster play. Who's going to stop him? But again, you got to watch for the blowout. If Vooch doesn't play, you could still look at Biyombo just because he's 5,500 now. His price did go up. But if Vooch is out, they have to play Biyombo mega minutes. If Vooch plays, I'm not crazy about it. It's a pace down spot. He's 7,300. But if Vooch is out, I think I will like Biyombo a bit. DeAndre Jordan, I love DeAndre Jordan at 6,700. I like targeting centers against Minnesota. As good as Cat is offensively, he's almost just as bad defensively. So I think that's definitely an interesting way to go. I like Greg Monroe at 5,900 against the Knicks. The Knicks still haven't been able to defend against centers, and I think Greg Monroe has been, even though he's had a couple games that were kind of stinkers, his price went back under 6. That's where I prefer to play him. And we do know that when he does get the run, he does have some significant upside, and the Knicks have 3 potential centers with size, so I think Monroe could see some run here. Myles Turner at 56. His price is so cheap, you have to consider him. I know it's a pace down spot, but in the beginning of the season, targeting, and even to now, targeting centers against Detroit has been a pretty good, has been a successful game plan. And it's a situation where you have that shot only at 5,600. Myles Turner is a starter. He gets pretty good minutes, and he's got a pretty good matchup, I think. So he's certainly in play. If Jokic is out, you can certainly look to Mason Plumlee. His price did increase from 4,300, but it only went up to 51. So I still think he's in play if he's going to get monster minutes against Washington. Of course, that's only if the Joker is out. There's other guys you can consider. There's, Zaza Pachulia. There's all kinds of people that we have down low. We're not going to get there. Those are just the guys that kind of stand out to me on my initial look. Anyway, guys, that's going to wrap it up for us. We went a little bit over the time today. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. We appreciate it. If you're listening on Podbean, give us a follow, leave us some comments. If you're listening on iTunes, subscribe to the iTunes, the podcast on iTunes. Subscribe to the channel. Leave us some reviews. Leave us some ratings. Bump us up those charts. If you're not a member of WiseTake.com, please sign up. Membership is free. You get access to our free raw projections. And really, the main thing is you get access to our community. We're trying to get some things going. I'm going to try to implement a little chat feature for the members only. We have a forum on there. I'm going to try to run some contests, give out some of those awesome WiseTake hats that we got. But anyway, guys, that's pretty much it. Well, like I said, we're going to have Fuego Steve on the pod for Thursday's slate. So Thursday's slate, we will have Fuego Steve back. Looking forward to that. WiseTakeLIVE will be on today. However, it will be on at 5, not 5:30. It's going to be on a little bit earlier, 5 to 5:30. So if you guys can catch that, that'd be awesome. I really appreciate that. And you can find that on the YouTube channel as well. Anyway, guys, listen, it's a big slate. Like I said, if you don't like these larger slates, just join a smaller one, break it down, and do what's best for you. But regardless, it's Wednesday, big GPP day, a lot of big tournaments on both sites. As always, good luck.
Yeah.